It's another day of training, and today we are looking at environmental management systems. Welcome to Environmental Safety Management Institute. Introduction to Environmental Management. If you're talking about environmental management systems, EMS, it provides a structural framework for organizations to manage environmental responsibilities systematically, comply with the regulations, prevent pollution, and continuously improve environmental performance. So what exactly are the benefits of environmental management? Now, when you implement an effective environmental management system, it delivers multiple benefits to your organizations. Number one, regulatory compliance. Now, a systematic identification and management of legal requirements reduces violation, fines, and enforcement actions. These go a long way to help you in your regulatory compliance in the areas of environmental management. Number two, an effective environmental management system saves cost. Now, resource conservation, waste reduction, and operational efficiency improve, improvements in lower cost for energy or water or raw materials and waste disposal are part of the benefits that you get from what? From an enhanced environmental management system. Number three is reduction. Number three is risk management. Now, a proactive identification and control of environmental aspects will reduce the risk of spills, releases into the environment, and environmental damage. Also, another benefit you get from an effective environmental management system is reputation enhancement. Demonstrated environmental responsibility strengthens the relationship with your customers, with your communities, with your regulators, and your investors. This will help to reposition your reputation among these stakeholders. Then it also, as a benefit, brings about competitive advantage. Environmental performance increasingly influences procurement decisions, regulatory approvals, and access to markets. So this gives you a competitive advantage over your competitors in the market. Then also it enhances employee engagement. When you have an effective environmental management plan, it engages employers in meaningful initiatives, thereby improving their morale and attracting environmental conscious talents who will begin to work with you for the good of your organization. Let us look at ISO 14001. ISO 14001, Environmental Management System Framework. ISO 14001 provides the internationally recognized standard for environmental management system. Following a plan, do, check, act cycle. You plan, you do, you check, you act, you plan again, you do, you check, you act, you do in that cycle. Now, let's begin to look at it from the context of the organization. Now, when you understand internal and external factors that affect environmental management, including the stakeholder needs, compliance obligations, and organization purpose, you will begin to see how your organization will position itself better and also function well. Apart from the context of the organization, in the area of leadership, top management demonstrate leadership and commitment through policy, roles, and responsibilities and integrate it into the business process. Then in the area of planning, identify environmental aspects, compliance obligations, and risks as well as opportunities helps you to establish your goals and plan your actions. Also, in the area of support, when you provide resources, competency, awareness, communication systems, and documented information that has to do with the environmental aspect of your organization, then this will definitely support the operations of your organization better. What about the area of operation? Now, when you implement operational controls, when you implement things like emergency preparedness and management of change, it definitely begins to affect your organization positively. Then in the area of performance evaluation, monitoring, measurement, analysis, evaluation, internal audit, and management review are all part of an effective environmental management system. And this is also for the good of your organization. Then also, last but not the least of them, is in the area of improvement, taking corrective actions, preventing reoccurrence, and continuously improving on what you have done definitely will help your organization positively. Let's look at environmental aspects and impacts. Organizations must identify their environmental aspect. Now, in the earlier series of this lecture, I have told you that an environmental aspect is that part of your organization that interacts with the environment. Okay? That part of your organization that interacts with the environment is the environmental aspect of your organization. Let's take, for instance, if you have a printing press, you have a generating plant for power. You are also generating waste, especially paper waste, and sometimes some chemical waste from the dust that you get from your tuners and all that. Now, this waste is being pushed into the environment. The emissions from your generating set also emits carbon monoxide and other substances into the environment. That is the environmental aspect of your printing press. So organization must identify this environmental aspect of their organization and evaluate the significance. How significant is the environmental aspect of your organization to the environment? What are the common environmental aspects that they should look at? 1. Air emission. Combustion sources. Is it from boilers, from generators, from vehicles? Process emissions from manufacturing operations, okay? Fugitive emissions like leaks, evaporation, or dust generation, or other. These are emissions into the environment. Then also we have the issue of water discharge. Discharge. Now, wastewater from the processes, from sanitary wastewater, stormwater runoff, cooling water, and contaminated drainage are part of environmental aspect of your organization. What about waste generation? Hazardous waste, non-hazardous waste, solid waste, recyclable waste, universal waste, all those things like all batteries, lamps, electronics, and other special waste. They are environmental aspect of your organization. Then you also have resources consumption. Your organization will definitely consume resources like energy. This energy may come from electricity, from natural gas, from fuel. It will also consume water. It may be municipal, it may be well, it may be surface water and all that. It may also need raw materials. It may also need packaging materials. These things are environmental aspect of your organization. Then we talk about soil and groundwater. Potential contamination from peats, underground storage tanks, past activities, or waste management. These are soil and groundwater aspect of your organization. What about the issue of noise and vibration? Equipment operation, vehicles, construction activities. These are environmental aspects of your organization. Then we talk about land use, like site development, habitat alteration, impervious surfaces. All these things are what? Are environmental aspects of your organization. Now, let's look at significance evaluation. You assess each aspect of this environmental aspect we are talking about, considering the environmental impact magnitude and the severity of such an environmental aspect. You also look at the regulatory requirements, the legal obligations, the stakeholders' concerns, including the community and customer expectations, frequency, duration of the activity, and the quantity or concentration of the releases that are being released into the environment. Significant aspects require operational controls and objectives for improvement. These are things you must necessarily do for what? For your organization to be able to understand or estimate its environmental aspect, and as well take into consideration how it will improve on it. Waste management hierarchy. Now, waste management is very, very important in environmental safety management. However, there are things that we need to understand. There are some ways that if you look at waste management, you will realize that they are more a priority than others. So we are going to look at this waste management based on the most important, like that to the end, so that you understand that if there is an option for you, this is the hierarchy of selection. Those who read economics will call it a scale of preference. Which one is more important that you should make use of than the other? Now, the first thing in this hierarchy is source reduction. Your ability to reduce the waste from the source. Now, this refers to preventing waste generation through process improvement, product redesign, or material substitution. That material that is going to generate waste, you substitute it with another material. This is the most effective method as it eliminates the waste entirely. Reuse. Finding uses for materials without reprocessing them. Now let me give you an example. Look at plastic containers. When you buy like a bottle of water, you use the water. After using the water, you can refill the bottle and use the water again. This is reuse. You don't necessarily need to process the container. There are some people that process on local drinks. If you go to countries like Nigeria, you will see them processing local drinks called zobo. When they do this zobo, they can use the water bottle and refill it with the zobo and sell it. These are means of reuse. It can be pellets or can be packaging materials or finding beneficial uses for byproducts. This is reuse, and it reduces the waste. Then another thing is recycling, whereby you process the materials to recover the value that should have been lost if the material was not processed. This includes traditional recycling like paper, cardboard, metals, plastics, glass, and other. And then also specialized recycling like electronics, batteries, and oil, among other things. Treatment. Treating waste to reduce hazards before disposal through physical, chemical, or biological processes. Then disposal. Landfilling or incineration without energy recovery as last resort when other options are not available. Now, apart from these methods, we have what we call waste minimization. There are different strategies that you involve in waste minimization. You conduct your waste audit to identify the sources and the quantities of waste you have. Then you involve your employees in identifying the reduction opportunities. You establish your waste reduction goals, and then you begin to track the progress. Now, once this progress is being tracked, you implement your inventory management so that you prevent materials from expiring or being obsolete. Then you begin to optimize your process to reduce the scrap and rework the process. So when we are talking about waste minimization, it It's all about making sure that you purchase durable, repairable equipment and supplies, and then you implement take back programs with your suppliers, so that once a particular machine is obsolete, instead of finding it difficult to dispose it, you can return it back to the supplier and get another one easily. Pollution prevention. Pollution prevention focuses on avoiding pollution rather than controlling it after generation. Okay, let's begin to look at air pollution prevention. You use low emission equipment and processes. You implement fuel switching to cleaner energy sources. Okay, instead of using generators, you can use solar panels to generate your energy. Okay, you optimize your combustion processes. You implement a leak detection and repair program to make sure leaks of your oil is not rampant on the ground. Okay, you capture and you recycle your vapors. I could remember that while growing up, there was a cement factory in our state, and you discover that whenever they produce the cement, the dust was almost everywhere, affecting the crops, affecting the people, and everywhere, until advocacy kept mounting pressure, and they now have to what to rechannel the dust and reuse it back in the factory. So these are things that you do to what to prevent waste. Okay, so you recycle your vapors, you use your low volatile or organic compound VOC materials to make sure that production is less of what of pollution. Water pollution prevention. Implement good housekeeping to prevent contamination of stormwater. Perform preventive maintenance that will prevent leaks. Use dry cleanup methods rather than hosing. Okay, and you also implement your spill prevention measures. You substitute the less hazardous chemicals, you segregate the process, you stream to concentrate contamination, and then you implement your water recycling and reuse processes. Then soil and groundwater pollution prevention. You provide secondary containment for chemical storage, so that when the storage is spilled over, then the secondary containment will contain the chemical, and then it will not end up into the soil. What that means is that, for example, if you are going to have a tank that will accommodate your oil, you need to provide a containment. Okay, you build a containment around, so that whenever the tank is leaking, instead of that oil to go into the ground, it will still be within that chamber, which can be recouped, and it will prevent the oil from contaminating the soil. You inspect your groundwater storage tanks and piping. Conduct environmental assessment before you acquire any property. Okay, then properly abandon unused wells and underground tanks. Implement erosion sediment control. All of these things, when you are doing them, they are going to help you preserve both your soil and your ground water. Let us look at resource conservation in environmental management. Resource conservation. Now, when we want to talk about resource conservation, there are some of these resources that we should concentrate on. The first thing we should look at is energy management. Energy management. Conduct your energy audits, identifying your consumption patterns and improvement opportunities. Implement energy efficient equipment like LED lighting, high efficiency VAC, variable speed devices, okay, so that you can optimize the energy that you have. If you are generating energy, for example electricity, make sure that you use bulbs that will consume less of the energy and still be very efficient. Optimize your building in such a way that optimize building envelopes through insulation and sealing. Okay, because when you put ceilings and insulations, they help reduce the amount of heat that would have been absorbed into what? Into that building. Therefore, the energy that is already in the building becomes enough for what? Consumption. Establish equipment shutdown procedures for non-production hours, so that once there's no production, the energy will be conserved. Use building automation systems. Consider renewable energy like solar or wind. Okay? Then track your energy use per unit of production, so that you'll be able to understand, if you are doing production for 2 hours, how much energy are you going to consume? If you are doing production for 1 hour, how much energy are you going to what? To consume? Water conservation. Fix your leaks properly. Make sure that you install water efficient features and equipment. Implement closed loop cooling systems. Okay? Also, make sure that you recycle and reuse processed water where it is possible. Use dry or low water processes where it is feasible. Also, harvest rainwater for non-potable uses. Okay? You can, if you go to places like Edo State in Nigeria, you will discover that they dig big wells in the compound, and these wells harvest rainwater and accumulate it for domestic uses. Track your water use metrics, so that you'll be able to understand where do you use water most, on what operation do you use more water, and all that. Then we talk of material efficiency. Implement inventory management systems, minimizing waste from expiration. You optimize your material yields through process improvement. You use vendor managed inventory systems. You purchase durable items rather than disposables, so that you can use them over and over and over again. You standardize your materials and equipment to reduce what? Variety. Then you implement your packaging reduction programs, so that you make sure that your materials are efficiently utilized. Environmental compliance management. Environmental compliance management. Regulatory tracking. Let's look at environmental compliance management. Okay? Environmental compliance management. Let's begin with regulatory tracking. Maintain systems to identify applicable environmental regulations. Track the regulatory changes. Communicate the requirements to all those responsible parties, and verify ongoing what? Compliance. Then another thing apart from the regulatory tracking is permits and authorizations. Identify the required environmental permits, whether it is air permit, water permit, waste permit, chemical storage. Identify all of them. Ensure timely application and renewal. Maintain permits that are accessible to operators. Okay? Comply with all the permit conditions, including operational limits, monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. Another thing in environmental compliance management is record keeping. Maintain required environmental records, including permits, monitoring data, inspection logs, training records, waste manifest, reports, and incident documentation. Records retention periods typically range from 3 to 30 years, depending on the specific requirement. Reporting. Submit required reports accurately and timely, including periodic compliance certifications, emissions inventories, discharge monitoring reports, hazardous waste report, and incident notification. Auditing. Conduct periodic compliance audits. Okay? Make sure you conduct periodic compliance audits. Now, when you do this thing systematically, you evaluate and adhere to the requirements, you identify the gaps, and you implement the corrective actions Audits may be internal, it may be second party, or it may be third party audit. The second party audit are done by the customers, while the third party audit is what? Is certification. So whereby you bring in a consultant to come and carry out the audits and what? And certify your organization. Environmental training. Now you ensure the personnel receive appropriate environmental training, including general environmental awareness for all the employees. There should also be things like role-specific training for those with environmental responsibilities to understand their roles clearly. There's also regulatory requirement training, such as hazardous waste management, okay, emergency response training, and refresher training at specialized intervals. These are very, very important for each and every staff of the organization. Environmental performance management. Track environmental performance through metrics. Okay, make sure that your organization adherence to environmental issues is being measured. You have absolute measures, normalized measures, compliance metrics, and leading indicators. Now, when we are talking about absolute measures, these are things like the total energy use, the water consumption, waste generation. These are our absolute measures. Then you have normalized measures like maybe the use per unit of production, sales, or employee. Then you have compliance metrics like violations, permit exceedances. And then you have leading indicators like audits, training, improvement projects implemented, and other. So you report this performance to management, to stakeholders, and to the regulators as required.